Welcome back to Is Anything Real, the podcast where we torch dashboards, laugh at the spreadsheets, and tell the truth no CMO wants to hear. Here's today's hot take. Paid ads don't work like they used to. The machine is broken. 10 years ago, you could drop $50 into Google and build a business. And today you drop $5,000 and maybe you get 3 calls if you're lucky. With me are Daniel Perumal and Nick Alter, co-founders of ThriveSide. Between them, they've run ads for Google, for Apple, Gartner, startups, and agencies. They've seen firsthand that the playbook is toast, and they're building a new one for founders who can't just buy growth anymore. Daniel, Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You got it. Daniel, I'll start with you. You've run ads at Gartner, Alert Media, even Apple. When did you first realize this doesn't work anymore?
Yeah, I think for me, the iOS changes, I think in 2021 was a big just shift in the industry. And I don't think I realized how big it was until a few months down the road. And I just remember running campaigns and thinking, I don't know what happened. All these little lookalike audiences that were just amazing, and we could just rely on and just hammer and hammer and hammer. They weren't doing it anymore, and remarketing wasn't the same anymore. And so I think that was the first inkling I had that something was really different. Something was wrong in the universe. And I didn't, understand how long that would be. What would that actually be? But that was really the first time I was like, yeah, something's weird.
I mean, I love to get weird. But Nick, you've got 15 years running agency ads for smaller businesses. Would you say it's the same story, or is it just about different scale?
Well, I mean, so my take on it was just that the rug got pulled out from underneath us, pretty early on in terms of, especially when Facebook first changed its algorithms, and that actually forced us to get more into different ad complexes, if you will. And then just, and then so we kind of clued in in the very, very early days that it's like, wait a second, this is going to change constantly, and it's going to change a lot. And just the question of is just that, and then the idea of diminishing returns. The interesting thing about that, and it's me and a guy named Rusty Shelton, we used to talk a lot about this way back in the day, back in 2009, 2010,
Right.
And when we were looking at and how we were starting to. At that time, we were like, okay, what is rented media? What is earned media? What is owned media? And we started actually we were coining those phrases at that time,
right,
to make sense of and navigate. It's like, okay, so how can we even approach this idea of rented as it continues to shift and change?
Yep. So, I mean, you've both said, and we all kind of understand, because I come from that same, background of, for instance, running ads through the 2008 financial crisis. I think we would all argue here that the platforms look the same, but the dashboards and therefore the results aren't. What do you think what do both of you think has actually changed under the hood that's driving that difference of where we are today?
Yeah, I think just on a basic level is the internet has changed, and like everything has changed in that way, right? The way that people interact with the internet is different, right? And I think you're seeing this more and more with AI now, although this wasn't the beginning of it. But, now people, instead of going to Google, they're going to AI, they're going to Claude, they're going to ChatGPT, whatever it is, or they're just reading a little snippet on Google from Gemini. And then also, I think just people in general a little bit more ad savvy, even though the ad platforms have largely stayed the same, but over the years the actual ads themselves look more and more native to the platform. But I think people have kind of gotten wise to it, and there used to be this sort of feel of like, yes, it's an ad, but people were used to seeing ads. They would see it in TV, they would see it in newspapers. It was very familiar to them. And now there's this drive towards native content, towards content that is just interesting to people and things like that. And so just the paradigm for me has really shifted on how people interact with the ads. And so, that in and of itself, no matter what the algorithm is doing and everything else, like, people interact with content differently, and it's getting more and more different, and that's going to necessarily change the ad platform.
Yep.
I think it's trust.
Ooh.
I think that the idea of where and how, sorry if the light keeps changing, it's because we have these automatic lights that are freaking out for some reason. I don't know why.
We love a good dance party here, though. Every
Yeah,
once in
that's
a while.
fine. Yeah, just strobing it. No, all right. So we, I think we go back to this idea of trust is something that how people trust is changing, continuing to change, and I think that's a large part of. And on top of that, it's not only is that there's a trust problem, so which actually is where I think buying behaviors ultimately culminate, if that's the right word.
Yep.
That's where the things intersect, and like that's where the action happens. But I also think that we have to take into account that there are agendas that are even competing against people's trust, that those that own the platforms, they are also, there's a, like, they're trying to accommodate, like, and they're not always transparent about what their agendas are, right?
Right.
And so we have to be mindful of what that looks like. And the thing is, this is that because historically, when we think about ads, right, is that, I mean, in that space, we had, these platforms that I could get on there and I could go post my ads. But then it got to the point where their platform, it became way more sophisticated to a degree or to a level that if I wanted to be competitive with the ads, then like you had experts that were coming in and they were looking at how they were getting, like people that figured out how to game the systems. And then the thing is that you had the people that own the platforms themselves that are, then they're going to war with the people that are trying to game their systems, right? There's that.
Right.
So like
Right.
things are changing there, that way. And now with AI doing what AI is doing, and like, I think, wasn't it that didn't Facebook announce that, and I think Google announced that, like they're kind of almost coming back full circle. It's like, hey, you'll no longer have creative control over the ads here soon, right?
Right.
And so like, because we're like, we understand our algorithms and our audience's buying behaviors better than anybody else does, or so they claim. And so therefore we're going to control that experience to another degree using these, and they're leveraging the AI piece. So it's kind of an interesting route to look at as to like what exactly are all the kind of different facets of effect that are happening, not only in tandem, but also that are affecting one another at the same time. So
yeah. That's valuable. So, obviously paid ads don't work the way they used to, right? Kind of shifting gears a little bit here into the founder mindset. I know you built ThriveSide on a founder maturity model. Can you break that down for us? What does that actually mean?
Sure. So idea state is that business is really predicated on what we sell, right? It's like you don't have a business without something to sell. And so the confusion that a lot of founders have is that they lose track, lose sight of what is it that matters the most to being successful in a market. And that is focusing on, it's being able to establish and say like, look, the blue dot of my business is what I sell. And my ability to actually focus on the right things at the right time, to prioritize the right things right now, not to go from this idea stage to scale, for example, which we hear that a lot, right? It's just like, I've got an idea and how do I scale this? And
how do I get that rocket ship to fly, right?
Right. And the problem is that like, that's like saying, well, it's like 1, 2, skip a few and a miracle happens. And then suddenly, we're Facebook and or something else. You're like, no, that's not how that works. And so instead it's identifying and saying like, no, zone in on, it's just like, let's focus on like like think about all the things that kill businesses, right? Like complexity kills business, too much business kills business, too little business kills business, that kind of thing. But the reality is, if we broke it up, broke apart and said, no, the thing that we need to focus on in business is what we sell. And it's the stages that we find ourselves in market is the way we describe it. And saying like, here are the 7 stages of market that we find ourselves in based on what we sell. And these are the resources we should be deploying based on the things we need to be accomplishing to achieve or to graduate from that position in the market to, let's say, how do we go from the discovery stage, the validation stage, and how do we get to mainstream adoption, right? And then from mainstream adoption to really what we're all really desperately trying to get to is sustainability. How do we get to a sustainable, profitable position in a market that we can then build a foundation from and expand upon and create that reliability? And so it's just basically, it's like you hear all this advice out there, you hear all these different experts. And what I learned over the 15 years that I ran Alter Endeavors, that I ran my marketing agency is that we desperately need to take a flying leap back and up and go further left in the equation to really look at and say like, hey guys, like you're not wrong when you're at that stage, but you're discounting or discrediting that there are actually probably 3 or 4 stages before your expertise or your, what you champion that they need to graduate from, that they need to get right in order for them to successfully navigate where, where you come into play, which is where a lot of VCs are, a lot of private equity groups, and a lot of these guys that are, that they're like, I've studied Coke and Apple and everybody else. And you're like, and neat.
How do I distill that backwards down to a smaller level?
Because so the thing, like even like this morning, I finished Pattern Breakers today, and like it's brilliant. I freaking love that book, but that is like, and he does an extraordinary job of codifying what I call basically like, how do you actually establish or determine that this is the right idea to pursue, and like what makes it uniquely better, right? And then so like the thing is just that that's extraordinarily important. I mean, at that, in that very beginning stage. And so anyway, so like I can go on and on, but you get the idea. That's really what it is.
No, I get it. And there's so much about, within that, from both of you about pushing founders to be proactive and not be reactive in the way that they market. I think that impacts the growth curve, Nick, as you were just, speaking towards, and there's a lot of noise out there in the world, right? Whether it's cohort-based programs, it's growth accelerators, it's thinking maybe I need a fractional chief growth officer, right?
Well,
that's confusing for founders.
1,000%. I think the other thing is to like, especially in the spirit of this podcast, and just kind of keep, dial this in.
Sure.
Like ads are useful. They can be useful in the right, in the right circumstances, at the right time. And it's not to say that there aren't ad platforms out there that aren't, that aren't doing their job, that, and there's people that aren't being successful at that. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, but the reality is that like, just because that's working for, this group, well, these guys over here, like, I mean, Danny and I, we come across all these different coaching people and these different coaching platforms. And it's like, here's how you use ads. And it's kind of like, and the thing is that like what they're touting, it's like, they're like, I'm like, yeah, you know what, that actually might be working for you in this particular scenario. But then for everyone that is the case, is like they're creating, it's more of a mimicry model rather than an established, like, this is like, this is how we, can prove out and say like, here's why this works, right? Rather than just saying, oh, this works for me. And it's like, but can you actually justify, and can you logically, tie back to this is why it works, right? So
it's not about like a lack of ads. It's a mistaking ad spend for strategy almost, right?
Well, and I think when ads really started getting big, and there was a lot of people who made a lot of money in the 2000s, right, from ads, and they just kind of hacked their way to it, right? And there was this view of ads that I think has been pervasive since then, that you can just kind of run ads and be a little hand wavy because they'll deal with your audience and they're going to help you with creative. And they might even have some sort of score on your landing page or whatever it is, or we have a native form. And it's not that those are bad in and of themselves, but you're abdicating your role as a founder of understanding what you sell, understanding who you sell it to, and understanding the true value of your product. And what we're seeing now with this kind of like rejiggering of everything that's going on in that world is actually really what it is you're going back to the foundations. You're going back to, what is truly compelling about your product. And so in the ad space, if you can understand and be proactive about, hey, this is what I sell, this is my guarantee, and this is why the people buy it, why they care, then ads still can be useful, right? And so I think in some ways it's really good, right? We're going back to like true business, not just I'm going to just hack my way to prosperity, right? And that's good, right? And that's what we need to do, because ultimately what it created is this idea of ads and like, I'll get some VC running and I'm going to start running ads. It created this like false incentive structure that really didn't exist. And you could get money for free, in 2019, 2020.
Yep.
And from like a VC who's like, I'll throw you, $4 million to go run ads. And it's like, hey, you have a B2B SaaS company. And why are you running ads when your entire world would be different if you only had 5 clients? And so instead of going to run ads and just hope that I lead gen 1,000 and then my funnel is really wide, right? Like, then just go talk to people, have a conversation and work them through methodically. And then when you are ready to go to market more broadly in that adoption stage, then you can do it.
Right.
Well, and I think just to pile on that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, I'll say something real quick about it, and then because we move on. But like one of the things that like Daniel champions, or that one of the things that we've leveraged really, really well is just that like using like almost like ad microdosing has been, it can be a really useful way to quickly validate very cheaply that, what we do have from a compelling narrative standpoint, that what we do have is actually functional. Like one time, we had a women, I this is from another company and another that I own. And we were doing a women's period health quiz, for example. And we'd run a bunch of different assessments and quizzes and things like that across a broad spectrum of stuff. This one in particular, like what we stumbled across, ran only a few $100 and got, several thousand responses that were very, with a lot of data and, a lot of desire for follow-up action. And it was like, oh, okay. So like there, so that's a way that like we see that's like, that's still true, that we can leverage tools like we can leverage this ad tools to kind of help rapidly iterate on what is compelling.
Right. So it's the combination of doing that at micro scale, right? So you can validate, but then also we've got the impact, we've seen the post-COVID rebound with conferences and personal networks being key there. I think that's another piece of the puzzle in this thing, especially as we talk about AI even creeping up, like you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
The personal connections are the secondary or primary validation for the business ideas.
You can build very solid, like multi-million-dollar businesses. Somewhat depends on what you sell, right? If you're selling a snack, then that might be a little harder, but maybe you can, right? You get the right distribution partners. But yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking about, even as we were talking, was, this post-COVID boom of in-person and just this desire to be in community with one another in just a way that didn't quite exist before. I think we probably knew it in the back of our heads going into COVID, but then when you're, sitting at your house all day and, doing whatever you're doing, then like, you actually realize you really desire that. And, I don't think it's unique, but I know here in Austin, there is such a strong community of people who legitimately just want to get to know new people. And it's really cool. And, what we can I've found that there are very few places that I can't have some sort of access to in Austin just by knowing people, right? And not being an asshole and just like going to talk to people. And so
that works for him. It doesn't work for me.
Flip side to the coin.
Daniel, you said snack earlier. Now I want a snack. You better give me one after this.
But yeah, I really do think, I mean, with a lot of the work that our clients, like we've done with our clients, is actually building that community. And especially as you continue to grow and you kind of have your core customers, it is important to eventually start, owning and championing that community. And that really is sort of the backbone of everything you're doing from a revenue standpoint and a growth standpoint. And, just think about it. Like if you have a really compelling, whatever it is, offering, service or product, what will really happen is if it is so compelling, and if you do a good job of reminding them why it's compelling, then you will get a lot of referrals. Then a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I know this person, like this person is great at this. And they'll just do the sales for you. And you don't need to go spend money on the ads and, and be next to some, Temu, like knockoff soap or something like that. Like, they'll just do it for you. And that is so much more compelling. If you hear from a friend that this is really good, you need to be doing this, then great, right? Like that is what we're going for. And how do we articulate that so they know that? And how do we remind them and just say on them and be like, hey, like, remember this feeling that you had. It's like the feeling of buying a new car or something like that. Like, I accomplished my goals. This is so cool. But the thing is that new car smell wears off. And so you need to remind them. You need to give them a little spray and just keep them reminding them, like, you used to be in the dumps. It used to be bad.
Right.
But you're okay now, right? And remember how good that felt.
And Febreze does not turn a new car smell back on, right? It changes the smell.
No, it does not. It yes. And people know
it kind of smells like sadness a little bit, actually.
One of many things in the world that smells like sadness. Well, Daniel, Nick, incredible conversation here, from ads collapsing to new models for sustainable founder growth. You've given our listeners a blueprint for the post-ads era. Where can folks find you and ThriveSide?
Yeah, come to ThriveSide.com. And if you're founders, specifically kind of, we work on ThriveSide.com and also foundersbestfriend.com. So find us there. We'd love to have a chat. And, we just love to get to know you and figure out, if we can help or if we can connect you to someone or anything like that.
Cool. And then finally, guys, for the founder listening, frustrated that ads are draining cash with no return, just really quickly in a few words, what's the one move they could make this week to fix that scenario?
I mean, besides stopping spending money on ads, is that like that's the obvious answer?
That's an acceptable answer, right?
So there's
go buy a snack with the money you save, right?
I would just say go to foundersbestfriend.com. We'll fix that for you.
Yeah,
and stop spending. Right?
There's truth in that, but I think that just in all seriousness, one of the things that if you're a founder right now, and it goes back to what I said about rented, earned, and owned, is it's just that right now desperately is just that if you are not in the discipline of starting to build out a list of whether it's through a CRM or heck, I just use a spreadsheet sometimes, right? Of being like, hey, here are 5 new conversations with people that are the right people for me to be talking to this week. And you're like, well, how do I find them? Stop sucking, stop being lazy, and go out and actually have conversations, right? And the thing is, it's just that and by the way, AI, for the most part, just so everybody is aware, it's not going to solve that for you. It's just not. I mean, there's tools out there that can be helpful, they can be useful, but it's got but you need to figure out what it means to go back to community grinding a little bit, right? If you're really struggling with that, if you're not sure how to dial it in and how to get there, then it's okay, then you probably need to go back to doing more of the community grinding piece to figure out what that narrative is in order, because those tools won't be useful until you get that dialed in, right?
Fair point. Very good. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning into Is Anything Real, in the show where we sift the signal from the noise and torch the mirages this industry still worships. I'm Adam W. Barney. Just one final thought here. Ads aren't dead, but easy growth is. The winners are building businesses that don't need to bribe Google or Meta to survive. But Nick, Daniel, thank you for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
If this episode of Is Anything Real resonated, you're probably at a moment where the old playbook isn't holding anymore. I work with transitioning founders and executives to install operating rhythms that hold under pressure. Not motivation, not hype. I've spent over 20 years inside high-pressure environments and worked with over 300 leaders through moments where clarity mattered more than speed. If you want clarity you can actually rely on, book a foundation call at adamwbarney.com. Clarity over chaos, always.